Dallas, come take a look at this. It appears to be an egg with Ridley Scott's hand covered in oysters and leftover butcher guts inside it. Let me stick my face in it and take a closer look.
Oh no, not again.
Well, the famous facehugger scene where John Hurt is attacked by a creature that pops up out of an egg that opens like a flower and has a top that looks like labia did not go exactly like that. That was more like the Spaceballs parody. But that's not the last Spaceballs reference that would happen in this podcast. This is the host of A Few Words, Eric Santamaria. This week, I will be talking with videographer, painter, composer, very talented artist Brian Coppola, previous guest on the show, as we will be dissecting Alien. It's our second movie review. He and I are very much looking forward to talking about this movie, especially after what a weekend this was. First of all, we had another previous guest, Brandon the Mechanic Catino, making his debut in Glory Kickboxing. He had his second professional kickboxing bout and got a victory, unanimous decision, so congratulations to Joshu Catino. We had UFC 203 on Saturday. CM Punk got mauled. It was quite a slaughter. And yesterday was the 15th anniversary of the attacks on 9/11/2001. Can't believe it's been 15 years already. I, like most of you, will never forget that day. So a lot of heavy thoughts around that, but it's Monday, want to get your week going. And this week, like I said, we're going to be talking about Alien. We'll be talking about how lighting and shadows play such a large part in the color palette. We'll talk about the influence of the Swiss painter H.R. Giger and his designs of the creatures and surroundings. The famous chestburster scene, which is kind of a parody of Birth. We'll talk about how silence in key scenes really recreates the real-life counterpart to that, where your senses are kind of heightened by the silence. You're trying to concentrate because you're really concerned or scared about something, worried perhaps. How exactly does the alien grow without ingesting anything? What is Special Order 937 from the Weyland Corporation? And is Ash the science officer telling them not to touch it in the guise of trying to protect them because who knows what disease this might have, or we don't know about this creature, but he really had something else in mind? We marvel at the continuity that you put together through these moving images in your own head while watching a movie to tell a story visually. Is the climactic scene towards the end where Sigourney Weaver's in her underwear trying to make her seem more vulnerable because she's exposed, or trying to make it like she's the weaker sex like stereotypical movies have beforehand? And much more as we talk about the first entry in a series that spawned many sequels, spin-offs, and now prequels. So if you've seen this movie and enjoy it, prepare to reminisce and dissect this movie further. And if you've never seen it, prepare to be spoiled. Because if you're a cinephile or cinemaniac like Brian and I are, you definitely should have seen it by now. And we're not going to halt or pause our conversation because you haven't kept up. And one last thing before we start, want to explain this inside joke where I say, Matt! That actually comes from pro wrestling. Back in December 2001, the WWF had an angle where the Hardy brothers, before they turned TNA into the wrestling equivalent of Sharknado, were having somewhat of a feud. They haven't officially split yet as a tag team because they would do that later down the line in WWE as well. But there was tension there, and they were going to have a match at WWF Vengeance 2001. And there was a skit on Raw to make it official where Lita, Matt Hardy's girlfriend and friend of the team, was getting in between them as they were arguing, and her really deep voice just really stood out as she's trying to scream. So while Matt Hardy's like, well, how about you referee the match? Lita was like, fine. So we just marveled at her voice coming out so deep. Stop it, Matt. Stop. So anytime the name or word Matt would come up, we'd always say, Matt. So as we talk about the visual effects going forward, you'll understand now why I made that joke. So now that we're all set up and I got Brian on Skype, let's have a few words about Alien. The tagline, now very famous, is "In space, no one can..." Oh, I should do it like the stereotypical announcer.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
Scientifically true, but also very haunting. Even before we get into the details, just the trailer alone in this one, Brian, that noise that sounds like a scream, but not exactly a scream, that was recycled recently for the Prometheus trailer. Very haunting noise. That sent chills up your spine. That little egg hatching that's on the poster. It was very blatant to not actually see the alien just yet. And this is before audiences even got to see the movie. This is a couple years after Star Wars, a giddy, happy space movie. And this was not. This is very famously called a haunted house movie in space. Pretty accurate description. It was directed by Ridley the Great Scott, written by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Suchet, produced by Gordon Carroll, David Giler, and Walter Hill. The music by Jerry Goldsmith, and it stars Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, Tom Skerritt as Dallas, Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, now Sir Ian Holm as Ash, John Hurt as Kane, Yaphet Kotto as Parker, Harry Dean Stanton as Brett, Balaji Badejo as the very important role of the alien itself, and of course, Jonesy the cat, which does play a role in the movie. I'm not just throwing that in there to be cute. The plot of this horror/science fiction film is that this crew is aboard the spaceship Nostromo, mining out in space far away from Earth in the year 2122. I like to describe it as Dallas, Kane, and Ripley on a routine expedition. Party for one. Land of the Lost. Anyway, they're on a routine mining expedition, let's say, when they get a distress signal after coming out of their hibernation. In the commentary on the DVDs and Blu-ray over the years, it was described as a flower type of formation. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. I hadn't put the two and two together, but it does look like that. And there are a lot of subliminal themes throughout this movie, which we will be covering. Once the crew is aroused and they're having their breakfast and whatnot, a signal comes in, a distress signal, as we would later find out, from the moon LV-426. So part of the protocol, according to the Nostromo's hub computer, which is called Mother, is that they have to investigate any potential signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. So that leads to this crew going down to this moon, finding a derelict ship, coming across a parasitic life form that is brought back to the ship against Ripley's orders. We will come to learn Ash is carrying out the orders of the company, the Weyland-Yutani company. This corporation has ulterior motives for wanting this alien life form on board, and it basically goes apeshit and kills everybody. And it comes down to the lone survivor of Ripley, and that's the general plot of it. Like I mentioned, the trailer. What also sets the mood is the great score by Jerry Goldsmith. He's done a lot of great movie scores over the years, but I would even say that half of this score almost isn't even music. It's almost just sounds.
I definitely agree with that. He's very known for big brass instrument type scores, stuff that's just very overpowering. Any Star Trek fans would know the Star Trek theme, the Voyager theme, is fantastic. As subtle he's ever gotten in his stuff is probably like Poltergeist and Alien. If you watch Brendan Fraser's The Mummy, his stuff is very over the top, very loud, very epic. This was about as subtle as he could go. But apparently he did go a little overboard at times with stuff, which is why they didn't actually use some of the stuff he wrote for the movie. They actually kept some of the temp tracks from his movie Freud.
That's an appropriate movie to use because there's a lot of Freudian elements in this movie.
Yes, there are.
And it also wouldn't be the last time there would be a clash between Ridley Scott and Jerry Goldsmith. There's a very famous argument about the Legend score several years after this, about the European version having the Jerry Goldsmith original and the American having the Tangerine Dream version. But in this one, right in the opening titles, it sets the mood. Very ominous, very dark.
And I'm so with you. I think the opening is so fantastic. And in interviews, he always said he didn't like it. He had written something less of the sound effects and the creepiness and more of the epic feel of this is going to be one hell of a ride you're about to go on. And Ridley and him had to have a discussion. He said, no, take it back to the scary sci-fi sounds. And Goldsmith really wasn't happy with it, but I think he set the tone perfectly. And from the opening note, you get basically what the theme of this film is going to be, and it is going to be dread.
And Ridley Scott was totally right in this regard, because you mentioned The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, which is a remake, and that's being remade with Tom Cruise soon, by the way. But that one is large, colorful, cartoony in a way. This is not. What's also well done in the opening title is the opening title in and of itself. Kind of unboxing or unwrapping something. These hieroglyphic looking blocks show up at the top of the screen, and you don't even know what it is at first, and then eventually it's revealed to be the word alien. What better title for this movie would be Alien, because it hasn't been used before, surprisingly enough, with all the science fiction and UFO alien type movies from the 50s especially. It's unknown. This crew is going into the unknown right now. The term used universe has been used a lot, as opposed to one of the best science fiction movies ever made, which came out over a decade before this one, the 2001 A Space Odyssey film by Stanley Kubrick in 1968. That was very bright, very clean. George Lucas wanted to go opposite of that in Star Wars and have things looked like the Millennium Falcon, looked like it had been used. This continues here as basically these truckers in space, as it's been described, are in this dirty, dingy mining craft.
Ridley Scott said that Star Wars is actually one of the reasons why this movie was made, because he was going to do another period piece and really wanted to do something else. And I think he saw Star Wars
and said, wanted to make the antithesis of it.
and then like literally 2 weeks later, someone pitched him this film. The used universe was done pretty good in Star Wars, but it gets lost at times. Stuff still looks good. If you want it to look used, whatever it looks used to the naked eye, you've got to go like 30 times that for film. People might not get the whole used universe in Star Wars all the time throughout it.
Why would they? It's a fairy tale for kids at the end of the day. So it's very bright.
Right, yes. And the throne room, everyone remembers. It's beautiful. Well, this thing, the Nostromo is a bucket of bolts. It has been used. It's been, refurbished. It's got used parts from another ship everywhere. It's really looks like it's fallen apart.
What I love about it is that it's also the future. The year is 2122, but it's the future from the 70s. And that's something I always love in these sort of movies. Like I mentioned the 50s, the Forbidden Planet, that's the future according to the 50s. Everyone talks like the 50s. It's got the 1950s haircut. Star Wars in 77, everyone's got the 70s hair, and that's the future as what they envisioned it then. And that's the fallacy that I think a lot of these future movies fall into, is it's very limited to the time in a way. So when we watched this one from 1979, a lot of the computer graphics and circuit boards and everything look like they would have in 1979 because they didn't exactly envision what it might be. No one was picturing, I guess, iPads. Arthur C. Clarke might have, because you see those pop up or tablets pop up in 2001, but they still look like that's the future as envisioned in 1968, not how it could actually be. So I think that's a little cute thing. But this crew, this is a difference in a good movie like this and other sort of movies with an ensemble cast, is that they all appear to know each other very well. There's a chemistry there. There's a rapport there. And I find in other movies that aren't remembered, aren't as good, that's a big element. You don't see that sort of camaraderie, that sort of rapport, whether it's Brett saying right to everything and little moments like that and someone getting on the other person's nerves or busting their balls or whatever, or even a strong connection. You see that in all these great actors, and you need a good crew, an ensemble, like I said, to bring that out.
They were given background information for just like what they needed to do. And, Ridley Scott knew where each one came from, their background, just so they knew how to go forward. There's not really much character development as an exposition about anybody's backstory,
but there shouldn't
where they
be.
came from, what they were doing. Right. It's just their interaction that gives you everything you need to know about them. They've been doing this for a long damn time. They've gotten to know each other. They know what they're doing. It's business as usual, really. We get everything we need to know about each character just through their conversations and little banter back and forth.
And not to jump ahead too much, but to use this exact series as an example, we remember this crew. Do you remember the crew of Alien versus Predator at all?
Not even remotely. I have no earthly idea how many there even were. To say nothing of names or male or female, I don't even know how many there were.
You mentioned this ship is a bucket of bolts, and they have a very rough landing. It's something I like. It's not the smooth landing we see in other science fiction movies, and that gives it a real sense of urgency. What's the chemical composition of the atmosphere of this moon? Are they going to be stranded there on who knows what? Are they going to be able to get off the ground? It was a really good, realistic moment in that. And what's also interesting watching this movie back, knowing where it goes, knowing that Ash is really a synthetic, I guess it was, or I guess Ridley Scott has said it's a replicant from the same universe as Blade Runner and all that nonsense. I don't know what his obsession is with all this synthetic stuff, but knowing Ash and his agenda for Weyland-Yutani, it's really creepy watching him back. Whether it's that moment of him like warming himself up, jogging or whatever in place while the crew goes out to inspect the derelict ship, or when Ripley's second guessing the transmission and thinking maybe I should go out and warn them. It's a SOS. It's not a signal otherwise, blah, blah, blah. And Ash says, what's the point? In other words, he's trying to get her to not interfere and let this bad thing happen to them. I like watching the movie back knowing his agenda. I also notice at this point, I'm watching the Blu-ray, the theatrical release on Blu-ray, I might add. I'll talk about the director's cut later on, but I noticed the color palette is really good. For a movie that's full of blacks and blues and grays and dark colors, that makes a lot of the brighter colors really stand out in this great transfer, whether it's the blue shirts that they're wearing, the yellow lights from the warnings. It has actually good color palette. It really brings out the matte work, the matte paintings. Matte! Especially when they're walking towards the derelict ship. It looks almost photorealistic or maybe surrealistic. It looks like it's actually physically there as opposed to let's say a CG recreation.
Everything in the film was there. That's what makes all the sets so amazing and the ship so amazing. And they're walking on that. There's nothing CG'd there.
Right.
So you've got lighting and you've got shadows bouncing all over it. They still don't have that right in total CG things. What light will do just bouncing off of stuff and the shadows and creating that eerie feel, and even the cool stuff like when they go down to where the eggs are and you've got that layer of mist/laser. Such an amazing atmosphere that like you're saying, that palette of color throughout. That's all just natural lighting.
That's what I don't understand. Why, instead of doing something real that has real physics behind it, feels real because it is real. Israel?
What about Israel?
Why would you want to try to recreate that? Spend the time and money to recreate that with who knows untold thousands of mouse clicks when you could just build a set.
I don't know. Any of the exterior shots of the ship as it passes over, even in the original Star Wars Episode 4, it's a physical structure. There's nothing fake looking about it.
It's a model.
Especially because it's so big of a model that it just looks fantastic. When the ship disengages to go down to the planet from the magnetic holder or whatever, all these giant models moving, they just used their brains back then. Okay, we can't build a freaking full-size ship on this full-size planet. So he builds it to scale, and he puts two of his kids and another child in the spacesuits for the giant wide shots to get the perspective they need. That's ingenious. That's using your budget. That's using common sense, in my opinion, to not go out and start making CG stuff. It just looks fantastic when it's actually there. Because you can tell. You can tell when an object's actually there.
And speaking of ships, we're going to have to talk about H.R. Giger at this point, because this is when his influence really starts being felt. From very sexual overtones in all of his work, and really in this movie. I mentioned the Freudian theme before. The central computer on the ship is called Mother, and they're going towards the derelict spacecraft that they find on this LV-426 moon. I don't know about you, but looking at it now as an adult, I just see, in terms of the shape of this ship, the female reproductive system.
I didn't get that from the ship itself. I just saw more of just this bioorganic creepy ass look that Geiger came up with.
Well, didn't he make all the entrances to the ship vagina-like, and those kind of look like the fallopian tubes?
It does have all the curves and stuff going on. I didn't see it as much to there. The face hugger, obviously, make it very suggestive, but if you're not looking for it, it's just almost subconscious kind of thing.
Right, and I'm seeing this as an adult. When I was younger, when I would hear about the chestburster described as a little penis, I never saw it, but when he comes out in this one, I'm like, yeah, it's a little cock.
Yeah.
So they go into this Freudian H.R. Giger creation, which may or may not be the female reproductive system. I say that because look how impractical that ship seems to fly. But the crew finds this, what's called space jockey, never named in the movie, and that, of course, became the basis for the Prometheus prequel. Ridley Scott had said for a long time, I don't understand why all these Alien sequels never delved into who that space jockey was, what happened to him, where he came from, blah, blah, blah. And we all know now that basically the theory, as it had been for many years, and I resisted, of the aliens being a bioweapon pretty much is what the case is. I never liked the idea. I thought it took away from the alien in and of itself. I liked that they were called bugs, the xenomorphs. I like the idea of them infesting things like a beehive, termite hive. I mean, even the alien queen in the sequel looked like a giant termite queen when she was sitting down on her egg-laying apparatus. But I just thought them being a manufactured bioweapon really took away from the mystique of the whole thing, the parasitic life form of the whole thing. But I guess that's, quote, canon now, as the geeks say. And we look at the space jockey and we see that as we would come to see a chest burster, it had come through his or her chest. But I thought it was kind of cool not to know who the space jockey was, what the space jockey was. Obviously, it's a humanoid type figure. But I thought that was kind of the cool thing of Alien. The alien in and of itself burst out of another alien. So I just thought the mystery was kind of cool.
Absolutely. The movie is leaving out these key elements that takes a lot of guts in a film to show you this giant thing, this giant space jockey, they call it, this big giant alien in his chair with what seems like a giant gun in front of him.
Gun being a big penis.
Yeah, we're just going to walk past it and move on. Well, wait a minute. What was that? Can we go back to that? We're just that's it. We're good. We're moving on. We never go back to that. We never think about it. And no, you don't need it for the story. But Jesus, you thought one of the other films would have went into it. Thank God they go back to it now. But leaving that on the floor like that, on the cutting room floor, and just saying, we don't need to invest time into that made no sense to me.
I thought it was a good thing to do. I like leaving doors open, so to speak, or things unsaid. I think that's good fodder for your imagination. Maybe you could think of something. If the Dark Horse comics didn't go into it in and of themselves, it's cool to leave something mysterious in there.
Open-ended mystery, yeah. Really well done. I think it worked perfect in this film. I just think, why didn't anybody else go into it later?
Especially with that last shot when Kane was calling Dallas to come down and check this out, when it zooms in on the close-up of the space jockey's face and it goes dark before we could even get a really great look at it. Kane goes down into another chamber and finds tons of eggs. You mentioned the blue light before. I guess it was some sort of protective membrane or warning system, this blue laser light.
Didn't they give it a sound effect too when his hand first breaks that line?
Yes.
Which is why I don't think it was just light. It was implied that there was something more to that.
Well, it definitely lends credence to them being there, those being the eggs, as part of a bioweapon cache, which I guess is what that was. Because watching that before it was spelled out for us in Prometheus, I remember watching it back after seeing Aliens and the sequels and thinking, where's the queen?
After the Aliens film came out, the sequel, in my head, I kind of made up the idea that may be just one spot where eggs were, and there's a whole freaking race of these things, and Queen and everything else running around and another, few miles down the road. I like the idea that this is a crashed ship, and it's just the eggs, and if nobody had come into contact with them, there they would have sat, and nothing would have ever happened, and it would have been an unused weapon, really.
And now we get into the famous facehugger sequence. Facehuggers are very creepy. They look like some sort of crab or spider, And when they're on your face, it looks like a hand going over your face. And here is where silence is golden. By that, I mean the score does not intrude on the mood. If this was made now, there would be an overbearing score with cues telling you exactly how to feel at the jump scare moments. As it was made with craft and style back then, the music was absent because you were completely in the moment. Pretty much all the facehugger scenes, you notice there's no music.
Ridley Scott knew when to turn it down, and just let you be in the moment with dead silence and just some sound effects. You know, not to jump ahead, but just Brett and the chains rattling.
Right.
Just a sound. And with the situation with the egg right then when Kane gets attacked, I mean, it's just silence. All the little mild little Foley sounds of the glove touching the egg and movement within the egg and it opening, it's just all silent, but with some of the sound effects of what's going on. Like you said, today there'd be insane violins and trumpets going off to let us know to be scared.
And you know what that does psychologically? When we're viewers of a movie, we're already projecting ourselves into the shoes of the characters as it is. This heightens that because we are imagining ourselves dealing with this situation, this alien life form. What the fuck is that? We've all had the experience of hearing a weird noise at night or dealing with a spider or some sort of bug invading our territory. And that psychologically, subliminally, puts us right back in that sort of situation. So we are completely engaged in this situation that's really going to get your heart pumping.
It's something I never understood in cinema when they go crazy with the music in scenes that are very suspenseful. Whenever you're watching it, the atmosphere to go completely silent, the viewer has no choice but to be completely fully invested. You know, music is artificial. It's not something that happens in everyday life. So it
takes you out of the moment?
It helps support a moment, sure, but I think when you're trying to promote fear, I think it works well in horror to bring you down to the silence. I mean, films like The Exorcist, I mean, how often when she just, all you heard was the breath? You would think it would be self-explanatory that this is what you do, but try to find good horror movies that know when to shut the hell up and let the scene play. It doesn't happen very much. I ironically just saw a film, Don't Breathe, where they did manage to do something very well done where she was walking towards the blind killer bad guy, and they held the silence for a long time as she kept getting closer. And I was like, oh my God, somebody learned a little. But it's just a rarity. It really is. And it was done so perfectly in Alien.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think there's any music cues in any of the facehugger scenes. And when we see as Kane is brought back on board against protocol, as Ripley was trying to enforce, but Ash, with his ulterior motive, wanted to get this bioweapon on board, we see a really good look of Kane on the medical table, and this parasite is all over his face. It's clearly letting him breathe somehow, but the moment they try to get it off of him or get close to it, you see that tail tighten around his neck. Oh, it's such a great riveting scene. And that's when we also discover the other defense mechanism that these creatures have been bioengineered to have, and that's acid for blood.
O'Bannon was basically trying to figure out while writing it, why don't they just shoot it and kill it? Like, what is the reason why this is such a problem for them? Somebody else suggested to him, he mentioned having acid for blood. And that's such a genius thing because you can't really shoot this thing. You can't even cut this little thing off because the acid could kill the person or this tail could strangle the person. But even once there's this full alien, you can't really just blow it to smithereens because the acid's going to go right through your ship. You're going to decompress. We're in outer space. That's not good.
Right. They did a full body scan of Kane to see what was going on with this parasite, and it's keeping him alive. We know now the way the facehugger operates is it puts a tube down your throat and lays the egg that way. Eventually, they find it had fallen off of his face. They don't know why. I don't understand why they didn't do a full body scan right after that, and they would have discovered the embryo growing in his chest.
Let's do a post-op MRI or something. Let's do a little X-ray, see what's going on there, but nothing. What a scary scene, though, with when it's gone because you don't know where it went. And like you said, dead silence. You've got three people looking around the empty, quiet medical bay. You might hear a couple footsteps through like 3 or 4 straight minutes. It is dead silent. And God, is that not one of the most suspenseful, scariest sequences in any movie, especially if you don't know where the thing is or what was about to happen. Because you know, at this point, if you're not familiar with the movie, you don't know. It could have just come up one and it's about to jump on another.
But then we get to the chest burst scene, which is very infamous now in cinema history.
Once again, no music. Today, what kind of score would be? Oh my gosh, it would be going nuts with the violins.
Even warning us ahead of time. Like, even if there was some music coming on, like a little bit of strings or something like that, then we'd be tipped off that something's wrong. But that's going to take us out of that moment because they were just having this happy, we're glad that that's over sort of meal. And then all of a sudden in the middle of it, Kane starts convulsing and choking. And I didn't even understand what was going on with the spoon that Yaphet Kotto was trying to put down his mouth when I was a kid. I guess he's trying to get him to not bite his own tongue.
He thought he was having a seizure of some kind, so he was trying to prevent him from biting or swallowing his own tongue. Quick medical advice is that's a myth. Don't ever do that to somebody having a seizure.
So they didn't figure that out in 2122?
No, apparently not. But there's a whole bunch of things with that scene. Is that you've got back to your great ensemble cast. You've got your just back and forth banter. You know, we better get time and a half for this or overtime for this nonsense.
And one other thing that I'll shove. And one other thing that I'll shove in there, though, is I keep mentioning Ash's ulterior motive. If you watch this conversation full of laughs and smiles, he seems to know what's going to happen. Like, he keeps eyeing around the room and he's faking a smile like he knows what's coming.
I don't think I've ever noticed that. I need to rewatch that part. I really didn't think Ash knew 100% what was going on. I just thought he knew that he was supposed to have landed. He didn't know the next step or what else was supposed to happen. He hadn't gotten that kind of info yet.
Oh, he totally
did. Sure on that.
No, he totally did, because later on he's talking about how it's perfect. You're never going to defeat it, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as it burst through Kane's chest, what did he say to everybody? Don't touch it! Don't touch it!
Yeah. That's true. He did know. I'm going to have to watch that again. But the whole sequence there, everybody having just this banter back and forth, people just wanting their time and a half for overtime pay and all this stuff. Casual, and you have not even the slightest thought that something's about to happen. There's no music that creeps in, nothing like that. Dude just starts choking, and boy, does it escalate from there.
So this little xenomorph, the little penis as I called it before, with teeth, jumps out of his chest and runs away. So the rest of the movie is basically trying to find it. We also get the burial at space, as I call it. Not the burial at sea, but it's the same idea where they wrap his body up, Kane's body, and whoosh, shoot it through into the oblivion, which I thought was funny. The alien just seems to grow without any sort of input. I guess we can make a leap of faith and say it's just a movie because this is a bioengineered creature. But I always wondered how this alien grows so quickly. And I think it grows even quicker in the stupid Alien vs. Predator 2 movie.
Yes.
And we did see its skin. Brett finds its skin that it had shed. It still keeps growing and grows to basically a full adult within, a few hours?
Yes. What you're forgetting, good sir, is that you're thinking of earthbound creatures, that we need sustenance to create more growth. And this apparently is an alien, so we don't know its metabolism or how its cells multiply or do what they do. So we have to take that leap of sci-fi movie faith and say, okay, this thing grew without consuming anything new, and somehow it got larger with absolutely no input whatsoever, like you said.
Well, good sir, as we would learn with the xenomorph in later movies and action figures, is that they take half of their genes from their host after the facehugger stage. So that's why it's basically a humanoid form, whereas the other xenomorphs are more like whatever they were hosting. Like in Alien 3, it was the dog or whatever.
Right.
Or the Predalien. I don't want to mention that stupid shit.
Oh, fuck. No. God, no. Just no.
So in that sense, it would need some input, wouldn't it? But anyway, like I said, it's just a movie, whatever.
Well, they actually, for the first film, established that concept that it would take part of the DNA, or was that just something that we kind of started thinking about later? Because I didn't even think that hadn't really even been established until the third film.
Right.
So in their heads, it's just a giant alien, completely alien DNA, and it just grew. Who knows why or how? It just grew.
So the xenomorph starts basically picking off the crew one by one. A little subplot of trying to find Jones the cat, Ripley's cat, leads into some great scenes like the chains in the dehumidifier or whatever it is that Brett goes into.
The rain room.
Yes. And of course, the great claustrophobic air shaft scene with Dallas, where we have the first implementation of this device, the radar, that Dallas is looking at the creature on. So we already have it imprinted in our head that it's out there. It's coming close. We haven't seen it yet, but we have an idea where it is. It's getting closer. And those great shots of the circular air shafts closing in on us.
Yes, and it's pitch dark. It's lit only by Dallas's flamethrower. So the little flame at the end of it is what's lighting his face. Otherwise, you're surrounded by pretty much pitch dark in most of the shots. I just don't think in any other movie you could be that afraid of a white dot on a screen, because you're watching this primitive Atari-looking tracking system with a dot that represents Dallas and a dot that represents this alien, and you're watching one dot getting closer and closer to another dot, and your heart rate is going up, and you're at the edge of your seat, or you're either way back in your seat trying to get away from the TV. You know it's getting closer and closer. James Cameron must have taken that for the sequel kind of thing, but then added the sound to the radar thing,
which brought it to an even greater height too.
Even greater level, because you get that beeping sound that gets louder and louder the closer it gets. But that was such a fantastic way of creating suspense. And also, it's kind of like the Jaws situation. If we get too much look of an alien, it's going to lose its fright effect. It's going to lose that shock value. But it's also, you're going to get too much look of what's obviously a man in a costume. So you have to pick and choose how you want to do it. So that way, that Jaws kind of thing where don't show the shark too much because it looks stupid.
Up until this point, we've only caught glimpses of the alien.
Glimpses, right. The alien design that's so ingenious is the fact that you don't have any eyes. So you really can't make any connection into that thing whatsoever. I mean, that's where we get all our connection from. So there's no reasoning with something you can't even make eye contact with kind of thing. It's something you may just take for granted, but when you really give it some thought, that's such an ingenious addition to that design. I just want to say, too, it's not really Ripley's cat. I did some research on this. Jones is a ship's cat.
Oh.
Do you know anything about that?
The ship, just hanging out on the ship, it's everybody's cat, but she's the one that's petting it or with it most of the time.
Most of the time. I think she's taken kind of ownership to it, but I never knew this. The Navy has had ship's cats.
Oh.
A cat that would just be on a ship, a battleship or whatever, especially during the wars and stuff, and it would just be just comfort and stuff because it's a nice little pet, but it's also, keeps your rodents and mice and all, in control. So it's the same concept as Ridley Scott actually used that idea of the old Navy ships having a ship's cat.
Old Navy
Jones
ship?
Is actually, an Old Navy and a Gap
As
cat.
opposed to Banana Republic ship.
Yeah, the Banana Republic versus the Old Navy.
That's a great idea, but it also adds another element that people are always suckers for dogs and cats in these sort of movies, and we don't want to see any harm befall them.
It's absolutely perfect that you have this cat. And it could have just been her pet, but even the commentary, Ridley says, he's got dogs. Would you go back for your dog? Yeah, you would. I had owned a cat for 18 years, and I own a dog now, and if people say, "Oh, don't leave the cat, leave the dog, go, run." Yeah, until you're an owner and shit's hitting the fan, you may go back.
No, you have to go back, and that's what we see with Ripley later on when she's the sole survivor. You have to go back. You will not feel good in your heart if you let your friend, this creature that you care about, this other living being, die.
Yeah. Anybody who says just leave it, you must not own a pet or something
or you have no heart.
Yeah, you're heartless.
Speaking of heartless, the next big plot twist is that we find out that Ash is not a human. He's a synthetic, like I mentioned earlier. It comes out because Ripley tries finding out what is going on with the corporation or the ship's protocol. We find a secret order. The crew is expendable at the expense of whatever this life form is to be used for future bioweapon purposes. Ash, I guess, has a short circuit and just tries killing her. And we get the great shot. And this is another example of the magic of editing. The whole process of editing is taking all this raw footage and putting everything together in sequence so that it's seamless. Forget the fact that who knows how many hours it took to set up, that it may have happened on different continents, let alone different days. But it all happens because we put that together in our mind as viewers, and it's seamless. All of a sudden, this shot of this baseball bat to this now we know robot's head, because we're shocked. This is the other big shock of the movie. Dan O'Bannon had said that he did not like this plot twist at all, that it wasn't needed. I really agree with that. I don't think it was needed at all, but it is very shocking in the way that it's done.
If you didn't have it, you would have had just the shock value of the chestburster scene, which, yeah, that would have been enough. But I think if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. So how do you top that? Well, knock a guy's head completely off and show us that he's a robot. Shoot, they managed to get the audience twice in one movie with incredible shock value like that.
They did, but it doesn't really serve a practical purpose. In other words, why would it be a synthetic as opposed to a human that's doing this plotting for the corporation? A human would have served just as well. I don't think it necessarily had to be a robot, aside from just serving the purpose of shocking the audience.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty much what it is. Ridley has said that he thought it was that he can imagine these companies sending out these robots. He actually used the word droid. I think he's going to get sued for that one.
Droid.
Droid. But he imagined the company sending these out as sort of their little failsafe. All the humans try to take the mining or whatever and sell it somewhere else. They have that little failsafe guy who will bring the stuff home or stop whatever's trying to happen. I get that idea. Why it didn't really need to be a robot, just could have just been somebody. But O'Bannon just didn't like the whole thing because it was that concept that happened a lot back then, of that Russian spy kind of plot twist that someone is not who you expected. It doesn't need it. I don't think we would have lost anything if that whole concept, that whole subplot wasn't in the film. Well, let me ask you, do you think that whole subplot is completely able to be cut out? Just never happened.
I don't think it's necessary to cut it out. I think to justify it, all they needed was one line when they were talking to his head after they got him up and running again, which, by the way, is, for a movie that's full of great special effects and directing and everything, a horrible jump cut. When they set up the prosthetic head and then they cut to Ian Holm underneath a table with the milk in his mouth or whatever.
And then vice versa, when they disconnect him, goes from his head to the fake one in one shot. It's like, ee.
No, I could accept that a little more because I believe they cut back to Ripley or someone else before that. If they cut back to Ripley saying, Ash, Ash, and then when she hit the table, cut back to the real Ian Holm, it would have worked a lot better. But that's an aside. All they needed to justify it was one line saying that he was put on board because the crew's expendable and the corporation didn't want to risk a human having sympathy for the rest of the humans on the crew.
Mm-hmm. There also could be the concept that with having a robot, would the alien know he's a robot and therefore not attack him so he could drive that thing home?
Well, the Queen did rip Bishop in half in the second one, so I don't know.
Well, you know what? Bishop maybe deserved that, okay?
He should have Bishop slapped her.
Oh, no, he did not.
The alien kills the rest of the crew. We're down to just Ripley, who goes back after setting off the self-destruct device. She goes back for Jones, like we mentioned. Has to go back for the cat. Yeah.
That poor cat, if you watched her running down those damn hallways, she's got a cat carrier. And this poor cat's supposed to be in that thing. And I'm just thinking, man, if we could just hear what the cat was thinking, because she's throwing it up the stair thing.
She's pretty rough with it.
Yeah, she is. PETA would be going nuts.
I think there really wasn't any other option at that point because we also have the alarm system going off and the countdown from Mother. So we have a time frame to beat here before this explosion. I want to bring up the director's cut at this point because in the director's cut from 2003, as it's called, Ridley Scott says in the intro, due to the innovation of home video, blah, blah, blah. But I believe he has said this isn't really the director's cut. I think the theatrical version is the definitive version of it. And I agree. The director's cut added stuff that was not only just not necessary, but also took away from the movie. In the scene where Brett gets killed, showing the alien dangling from the chains before it comes down in the reveal, I never understood that. When he's just taking his hat off and letting the water pour on his face, cutting away to an overhead shot, I thought took us out of that moment. They also inserted here a deleted scene where Ripley finds Dallas cocooned and Brett also cocooned in this biomass, I guess, that the xenomorph made and we would get more familiar with in the sequels. I always wanted to see that scene. I thought it was cool. I'd seen it on some specials over the years when I was younger. So it was cool to see it in this context. But everything else that was added in the director's cut, I didn't really care for. And that includes this shot where before Ripley gets a final hold on Jones and the cat carrier you mentioned, the alien pops up out of nowhere. She drops the cat carrier and sulks away. The alien is looking at Jones curiously. I always thought that was interesting. In other words, why didn't the alien kill this thing? And in the director's cut, you see it smash the cat carrier.
It did?
Yeah, it smashes the cat carrier like, I mean, Jones is alive and fine, but it just was kind of giving the alien like an attitude, I suppose.
Most of the stuff, I could take it or leave it. That director's cut, I just feel like it should have just been called an alternate cut.
Right.
This was more of, okay, so we shot this other stuff. Some of you want to see it. Here it is.
A lure to get you to buy the DVD or Blu-ray.
Of course it is. When you get a director's cut, you get added footage. Your runtime goes up. This is, I think, the only director's cut I have ever seen where the runtime is shorter than the theatrical version.
Wow.
Which is very interesting is that Ridley Scott has mentioned the pacing is so important to him, and that sequence with Ripley finding Dallas and them in that cocoon-like state, that kind of just slows the film down pretty bad. One of the reasons why I didn't keep it in the first place.
Plus, keep in mind, that's in the middle of the countdown sequence.
Right, so you don't really want to slow down there. So he kind of cut more of the running around out just to try to keep the pacing similar, even though you have that one stall there. It was an unnecessary scene, especially because there was a dropped subplot between Dallas and Ripley that there was supposed to be something implied there. So it was supposed to have more emotional impact of her having to kill him, that we didn't really have that other than them being friends for all these years. There was enough there, but it would have been even more. So it's cute that they put it in that cut, but I prefer the theatrical version as you do.
Well, we go from the countdown into what would be basically a running theme from horror movies thereon, and that's the false finish, to use a wrestling term. And we think this is the end of the movie after the 3 explosions, a little overdone on the ship blowing
Just
up.
a lot, especially that one shot where we've gone to plaid. There was all of a sudden like that yellow flag. It was very weird looking.
What was running this ship that it caused such an explosion that we also hear in space? But that's what we thought was the ending. And then we get to Ripley undressing. Now, I wanted to ask your opinion of this because, as we all know, Ripley did not start off as a female character. It was more neutral. They decided to go with her being a female. Sigourney Weaver got cast. It was her breakout role, the role that made her a star. And also the first real action role for a woman. She would go on to be nominated for an Oscar with the sequel, reprising this role. So it's a very iconic role. However, for a part that's supposed to be so female empowerment, which it is, and that's great, then we see her going down into her underwear and basically being a sex object like women had been objectified in movies beforehand.
Ooh.
So there's been some debate about that. I never mind seeing Sigourney Weaver in her underwear, but I just wanted to see what you thought about what some people have said about that.
I honestly never thought about it as objectifying her as a woman or anything. If you remember, when they all come out of cryosleep, they're all in their underwear. The men are in just their underwear and without a shirt.
But there's a big difference, though, between reducing her to what's basically been a cliche for horror movies for a long time, the almost naked woman in distress. Don't you think that takes away from her in a way?
If she wasn't about to go to sleep in the cryo thing that we've already established, they go in with their jammies on.
It is a little sensational.
If it was a guy, would he have been stripping down to his underwear to get ready to go to sleep too? Or did they just do it because it was a woman? And we're trying to remind you that this is a woman now in peril again. I guess it could be a little bit of that. I feel like they had some reason to do it, not objectifying her.
That last scene is set up so well where the alien is hiding out in part of the ship where it really fits in with its curved head. It really fit in with the rest of the ship. And when its hand pops out, that's a great jump scare, again, with no music.
It so blends into the shot that it's there in the shot that they're holding for maybe 30 straight seconds. And you think it's part of the ship until it moves and its hand comes out and gives us all a small heart attack because it's like once again, there's no hint that it's coming because the music doesn't warn you, as they tend to do today all the time.
And at least we know Jonesy is safe because it's already been put into the chamber.
Yeah, Jonesy's already sleeping. She's done with this. She's out.
Now, back on the alien design, I never really understood those tubes or pipes or whatever the hell's coming out of its back, but we have to talk about its tongue with teeth, because I always thought that was really neat and cool. Some people called it phallic, and I never really thought about that until you hear about all this sex stuff that was originally in the script and Ridley Scott wanted to do, especially in that scene with Ripley being all pink and half naked and whatever. And I don't really get that impression until its tongue starts slowly coming out like an erection. Then I'm like, all right, I can see it a little bit, but I still think the idea of that little mouth inside its mouth is pretty cool.
Just more of Giger being incredibly scary human being.
Warped.
Warped is pretty much ingenious designs for a mind to come up with the stuff he did with even just the biomechanoid, the bioengineered walls of that ship on the planet, and just the designs of everything with the tubes and the skeleton type features.
Stuff going in your mouth. Like that stuff with Ash in the magazine trying to shove a magazine in her mouth, I never understood. And they go on the commentary about how it's sexual and this and that. I just thought it was weird.
I never ever got that. I thought it was just weird. I didn't realize that's what Ridley Scott was going for. There's a lot of stuff like that through the whole movie, the Freudian ideas. Giger's designs are absolutely terrifying, downright freaky.
The end of the film is Ripley sneaks into a spacesuit, uses her brain, basically a harpoon gun, and shoots the alien out into space, which is something we'd see recreated a few other times in the series. And then we see her sign off, the last survivor of the Nostromo entering her log, and a classic comes to an end. Without going necessarily into its legacy just yet, your overall thoughts on the movie?
You want to talk about a game changer? It set the standard for sci-fi and horror. In somewhat of an egotistical comment, Dan O'Bannon, the writer, said that if you wanted to do a horror movie in space, don't. We've done it. We got it right. You're not going to be able to top it or do anything we didn't do.
Well, the original title Star Beast doesn't exactly have the same ringer as Alien.
It doesn't at all. But he's kind of right. What are you going to do? You can try to do all the Event Horizon type crap you want. You're never going to be Alien. You're never going to hit that home run like that. Everything from your sound design of knowing when to go silent and knowing when to bring in your music cues and just to do the whole subtlety, just less is more. Don't let us see so much of it. Don't overwhelm us. I never really realized this watching it, how much of it is handheld to allow that freedom of the camera. And a lot of it was handheld by Ridley Scott himself because he likes being right behind that camera.
But it's good handheld because it's not this shaky cam stuff like Darren Aronofsky would do or these action movies where you can't see a damn thing, or everything's handheld now, like on TV, and it looks like they're trying so hard to make it like this looks real, so it's shaky type stuff, and it just kills my eyes.
Let me adjust that by saying it's not the shaky cam you get when a scene starts getting dramatic today and the camera starts to have movement to it and is shaking a little bit. Not that bullshit type of stuff.
Right.
Handheld.
Like, I like being able to see the movie, and there's a lot of still shots, a lot of good shots, but when it does go to handheld, it's on a scene, let's say, when they're trying to track the acid as it eats its way through the ship. So it is a high tension scene.
The movement is still planned with a purpose. It's not jagged and it helps to create that atmosphere.
This spawned a series. As I mentioned, Dark Horse Comics would create many comic series based on this one. There'd be action figures, video games, and many sequels. And then, of course, intercutting the Predator world into that, Alien versus Predator, which is a whole other thing in and of itself. This is the month where Aliens, the sequel, is coming out on Blu-ray. So I didn't want to talk about that initially without covering the original classic first. I'd love to have you back on to talk about Aliens.
We have to. Unfortunately, the first one was made with love and with the heart and brilliance of great creators, and as was the sequel. And then from there, I don't know what the hell happened. So I've not really thrilled with where the series ends up going. David Fincher had some good ideas, so I don't want to take too much credit away from him. He was more screwed by 20th Century Fox. But this film and then the sequel are the epitome of the franchise and almost those genres.
Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
You know it's a great movie when you have something done with skill, craft, style that thoroughly entertains you, but you still have some questions and mysterious aspects about it. And I'll tell you one thing that I still wonder about the movie. When the Nostromo intercepts this signal that we don't know the origin of or what the meaning of is behind it yet, and we later find out, of course, that it's a warning or SOS, and the Weyland Corporation has the Special Order 937 that Ash is trying to enforce to bring the alien back so maybe bioweapons can be manufactured from it or whatever. What I wonder is the Nostromo, as it set out on its mining mission, just the usual course of action. Did Weyland know this signal was going to be intercepted or that it was in the area? They were just waiting for this incident to happen with one of their vessels. Is that why it was really sent out there, or was it just a coincidence? I still wonder about that. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, but maybe not. You think on that for the rest of the week. Next week, I will be having a few words with Will effin' Brooks. Not Will Brooks from UFC and formerly Bellator. Will Brooks from the Wrestling Roundtable days. My buddy and I will be sitting down and talking about wrestling, his life, all that sort of stuff. But that's next week. You can do some things for me and my buddies in the meantime, though. For one, we just talked about filmmaking and this great horror film. Brian, this is a very creative guy. He just took up painting and he's doing a great job there. Videographer, graphic designer, composer, and Brian did his own horror movie as well. He has it on his YouTube page now. That's youtube.com/films128. Again, youtube.com/films128. And I encourage you to check out his film Remnants and see how he did on his take for a horror film. You could also follow the podcast on Twitter at A Few Words with ES. Give us a like on Facebook. Start a conversation over there. Send feedback, questions, whatever to afwpod@gmail.com. And the most important aspect of our social media is subscribing on iTunes and SoundCloud. Give us some hearts, likes, retweets, shares, downloads, whatever you want to say. All of that sort of stuff, especially a 5-star review on iTunes like the user WSK9002, who I believe is Woo S. Kim, a longtime Wrestling Roundtable fan, did. Thank you so much to Woo for your review, and why don't you do the same? Make up some rhymes like I just did. Either way, thank you so much for listening. I truly appreciate it. You keep me going. As we close this week's show, you are listening to Out of the Silence from Brian's album Autumn Winds, just like the alien itself, Out of the Silence. It's available on CD Baby, iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon. So hang tight until next week. Hope to have a mini or two for you between now and then. This is Eric Santamaria, the last survivor of the Nostromo, signing off.
Phone silenced. silence of the phones.
Airplane mode, Clarice.